Great, if you want to grab the church Bibles in front of you, tonight's reading is from Mark chapter 14, and you can find that on page 1019 of the church Bibles in front of you. That's page 1019, Mark chapter 14, starting at verse 1. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them any time you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent 2 of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened, and one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me?" "It is one of the 12, he replied, "one who dips bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of God. It would be better for him if he had not been born." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
Thanks very much, Catherine. It'd be great if you can keep that passage open in front of you as we're going to explore it together. I want to be honest that I feel slightly kind of unsure, a bit nervous about this sermon. It's going to be to me, it feels like a slightly different kind of sermon. So I don't know what you make of it. Maybe you won't think it's any different. But it felt to me in the middle of the week as I was praying that God sort of gave me something for this evening. So let's see what he will do with that. It all began with this idea of extravagant love. And I was searching on the internet for some examples, some stories of extravagant love, which kind of runs through the passage, as you've probably seen. What I was looking for were stories of celebrities who'd spent crazy amounts of money to throw a party for someone that they really loved. But as I looked, I was quite disappointed. See, there are loads and loads of stories of celebrities spending crazy amounts of money on parties, but almost every one of them were for their own birthday. which I suppose shows you that they really love themselves, which sort of felt sad. Then I found Wayne Rooney and his teenage girlfriend, Colleen McLaughlin. They had spent $8 million on their wedding. Kind of almost counts, maybe? I'm not sure. Maybe it was just showing off. But it sounded like a lot of money for a wedding. But the best I could find in the end was the American singer, Beyoncé, who proved that she was crazy in love with her mum by spending £100,000 on a New Orleans masquerade-themed birthday party for her. £100,000 for your mum's birthday party. How's that? I do hope her mum enjoyed it and that she was very grateful. On the assumption that this really was more for her mum's pleasure than for her own image, I guess it does count as a pretty impressive expression of extravagant love, doesn't it? £100,000 for your mum's birthday? Well, as I've already said, the bit of the Bible that we're thinking about this evening is all about this theme of extravagant love. But as we get into it, we're going to find that it's going to both open our eyes to a whole new league of extravagant love, and I think that as it does so, it's going to challenge us right to the core of who we are. We begin with the kind of signpost for everything that's going to happen in this chapter and in the next few chapters, really. Chapter 14, verse 1, now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away. Here's the key, the Passover. That's going to dominate the next few chapters. Do you know what it was? Let me explain. The Passover was really the most important festival, feast in the Jewish year. It celebrated Israel's escape from their slavery in Egypt that had happened centuries earlier. You can read about it back in Exodus chapter 12. It was a very dramatic moment where, after repeatedly resisting God's will, Egypt was about to pay a heavy cost. The angel of death was going to go through Egypt and strike down the firstborn of every household in the city. But the Israelites, who also lived there, would be protected from death by the blood of a sacrificial lamb called the Passover lamb, that comes later in the passage, which, after it had been sacrificed, the blood would be wiped on the doorposts of their houses. So the angel of death would know not to go there. And so it was that on that dreadful night, Egypt mourned, but Israel was safe. Because in Egyptian households, the firstborn was dead. But in Israelite households, the firstborn was saved. And as a result, the Egyptian king, the Pharaoh, finally gave in and released Israel from their slavery and let them go. That was the Passover. And so every year, the Jewish people would remember it. They would sacrifice a lamb, again, the Passover lamb, and they would share a meal to remember their rescue. They'd eat the lamb along with bread made without yeast, unleavened bread, and cups of wine, just like they'd done on that fateful night long ago in their history, the Passover. And that was the moment in Jerusalem that we're kind of diving into in these chapters. That was the buzz in Jerusalem at the time. The Passover was about to be celebrated, but then below the surface of all the celebrations, something else was cooking up. Something else was happening. Middle of verse 1, the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people will riot. The Passover and a terrible death was about to occur. And that death was going to change the significance of the Passover forever, as we'll see. So that's the introduction, but then the scene changes and a meal table in a village called Bethany, just a couple of miles to the east of Jerusalem, becomes the setting for this dramatic expression of extravagant love. The expression of extravagant love. Verses 3 to 9, have a look at verse 3. While Jesus was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Extravagant love. Now, I know many of us here are British and reserved and a little bit fearful, perhaps, of sentiment and extravagant emotion. Love, if it exists, isn't to be expressed too freely, it seems, in some of our culture. But really, the Bible isn't like that. In the Bible, love, in order to exist properly, is to be expressed. There's actually a whole book of the Bible devoted to the expression of sexual love, the Song of Solomon. Love is to be expressed. We shouldn't be fearful of sentiment, fearful of the expression of love. That's part of our humanity that the Bible celebrates. The nature of love is that it gives itself, and therefore love is to be expressed. And of course, that's true of God's own love for us, which is not the best kept secret in the universe. It's been expressed in word, and primarily in Jesus and in the cross. Extravagant love isn't just kept in. It's expressed. And that's what's going on here. Now, Mark is probably describing the same incident as John, one of the disciples of Jesus who wrote another gospel, another kind of biography of Jesus. He describes in chapter 12 of his gospel. It's probably the same incident. And if that's the case, then the woman at the center of this story is a woman called Mary, who was one of Jesus' dearest friends. And the home is presumably her family home, in which case Simon the leper, described here as the householder, was Mary's father. Now, we're not sure about that, but it seems that's probably the case. Interestingly, though, Mark leaves the woman anonymous. His focus isn't really on who she is, but on what she did during this mealtime. But the fact that the home belonged to a leper, Simon the leper, gives a different kind of spin, a different twist to the way that John tells the story. Because in the first century world, lepers were outcasts and outsiders because people were afraid of leprosy and other infectious skin diseases. But here's the thing, a member of this outsider's family, Mary, has been so impacted by Jesus that she breaks into this bunch of men reclining around a table having a meal in order to give this incredible expression of extravagant love as she breaks the jar of perfume and pours it on Jesus' head. Just reflect for a moment on her expression of extravagant love. It was a risky thing to do because at the time, women were not supposed to break into a circle of men eating together like this unless the women were serving the food. I know that's outrageous, okay? I'm not saying it's right, but that's how it was at the time. But the risk of rejection and the worry about what others will think about her doesn't stop this woman from expressing extravagant love to Jesus, deep devotion. It was risky. Her love was also very costly. And this gets picked up in verse 5. It could have been verse 4, we'll start. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. This is a lot of money. The perfume was worth a whole year's wages. And since women generally wouldn't have had their own money to buy such expensive things at the time, this was probably a treasured family heirloom. So it has sentimental value as well as monetary value. So now just picture the scene. Use your imagination. The woman walks into the room. She's holding this family heirloom, this expensive jar. And she steps alongside Jesus and pauses. And then she lifts the jar up and she breaks the jar. This jar, although it's probably been in the family for generations, it's never going to be used for anything else than to anoint the head of Jesus. The gift is total. There's no way back. And then having broken the jar, she pours out this almost priceless perfume on Jesus. And as the fragrance of that perfume fills the room, nobody is left in the slightest doubt that to this woman, Jesus means everything. It's public, it's costly. The gift is total. Her love was also extravagant, outrageously extravagant. Just think of all the good that could have been done if that perfume had been sold and the money used for good causes, verse 5. And that is why the men around the table were indignant. They say, look, she's gone completely over the top. This is embarrassing. It's wrong. And so they throw their words of rebuke at her like daggers to pierce her. Verse 5. That was always the risk this woman ran. But the risk was worth it. And so Jesus springs to her defense. Verse 6, leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. A beautiful thing. No one loved the poor more than Jesus did. But here was a love that was even more important than love for the poor. Here was a love for Jesus, a transforming love, which when it grips the human heart, will make us more ready than ever to love and serve the poor. But it's this love that must come first. Love for Jesus, worship of the master. So Jesus says, verse 7, the poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. Jesus is very clear. We must help the poor. But he says, you won't always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Extravagant love. And Jesus says this was a beautiful thing. Now, I want to ask you the question, which side of this debate are you on, honestly? Are you on the side of those that say this is outrageous, extravagant, over the top, and embarrassing? Or are you on Jesus' side, who says this was a beautiful thing? What if somebody in one of our worship services is so overcome with love for Jesus that their eyes are streaming with tears and they're dancing around and they're falling over? What? Over the top? Extravagant? Too much? Not according to Jesus. He said it was a beautiful thing to express such extravagant love to the Master. Friends, we could learn a lot from this woman, couldn't we? But there's even more. It's not just that it's beautiful. Jesus also says that her love was significant. End of verse 8 again. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. This woman was the first to love Jesus for who he really was. See, 3 times before this in Mark's gospel, he's told his disciples that he's going to have to suffer and die and be buried and then be raised to life. And each time it seems like it's just washed over them like water off a duck's back. They didn't take any notice. That wasn't the Jesus they wanted to believe in. The Jesus they wanted to love was a Jesus who was going to sweep in and beat the Romans and give them positions of power and fulfill their ambition. But the woman that they are tearing into with their dagger words is the only one who has actually seen the truth. That Jesus will save her life by giving up his own. That Jesus will win by losing. That Jesus came, as he said, not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. That's why she loves him. And that's why she broke the jar to pour out this priceless perfume on him. She's the first to love the real Jesus. Which is why Jesus says, verse 9, truly I tell you, wherever the gospel, the good news, is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Significant love. And did you notice that word world there? It's a word that pushes open a window actually onto an even more extravagant love, which we're going to see in just a moment. This expansive love of Jesus, which isn't just for the woman, isn't just for his disciples, isn't just for their nation of Israel, it is for the whole world. extravagant love, expansive love. But after this dramatic expression of extravagant love, just feel the painful contrast as for a couple of verses we move on to a story of betrayal and the rejection of extravagant love. Verse 10, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. This beautiful story of the woman's expression of extravagant love, it's kind of sandwiched between these two ugly stories of murderous hatred. First, in verses 1 and 2, the religious leaders who are determined to kill Jesus, and then Judas Iscariot's decision to betray him and to do it for money. Did you notice that, verse 11? To do it for money. Can't you feel the contrast? The costly extravagance of the woman's love who breaks this jar of priceless perfume over the head of Jesus, and then the miserly, selfish grabbingness of Judas, who's going to betray his friend for money. Feel the contrast. But it's not just that. It's hugely painful as well. Judas is one of the 12. Did you notice that, verse 10? One of the disciples. Jesus' inner circle of friends. He's just been eating around Simon's table with him. In a few moments, or in the next few verses, he's going to be eating the Passover with him. I wonder if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you really love. I don't think there's anything so emotionally searing as betrayal. But that's what's happening to Jesus. The woman has encountered the extravagant love of Jesus, and in response, she worships him with untrammeled devotion. Judas has met with the same Jesus, and he's seen the same love, but he's totally rejecting it. Feel the contrast. But what exactly is the nature of this extravagant love that leads to the woman worshipping and Judas betraying? Well, the final section gives us, I think, the explanation of extravagant love. Verse 12 again. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was necessary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover? Remember, Passover, that's the key to all that's going on now. Remember what it's about? A lamb broken in sacrifice so that its blood could be poured out to save a people from slavery. That's the Passover. Now, Jesus has no home, but he's very much going to be the host of this Passover meal, which is why verses 13 to 16, he's clearly taken a lot of initiative in order to put all the arrangements in place. Jesus is the host. It's his table. And now the disciples are reclining at this table, as they did then, in order to eat. But as they recline, the betrayal of Judas lands like a dark cloud over the celebration. Verse 18. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table, he said, truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. Can you feel the pain there again? One who's eating with me, one who's round the table, one who's one of my friends is going to betray me. It's a big deal. In that culture, eating with someone was a huge statement of friendship and acceptance. And yet one of those eaters is going to betray him. Treachery is in the heart of Judas, and Jesus knows it. Verse 19, they were saddened one by one. They said to him, surely you don't mean me. It is one of the 12, Jesus replied, one who dips bread into the bowl with me. Feel the pain. The Son of Man will go just as it's written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would have been better for him if he had not been born. And so, under the shadow of betrayal, the Passover meal reaches its dramatic climax here. You can kind of feel the tension in the room. As Jesus picks up that unleavened bread, you can see an example of it on the left-hand side of the screen there. And as he picks it up, he prays and he breaks it. And as he does so, he transforms the Passover forever. Because he said this bread is no longer broken in order to look back to a meal in Egypt centuries before. Not primarily anyway. No, the bread is now about him. Take it, he says, this broken bread, because this is my body. It's about me. It's about Jesus. And then after the food, the cup of wine is taken. But again, its significance is transformed. It's focused back on him, on his blood. Verse 24. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many, he said to them. My blood of the covenant. The covenant here is about the relationship between God and people. It's a relationship which we have broken by pushing God away from the center of our lives and living for ourselves instead of him. And to do that is to break the most important commandment, according to Jesus, which is to love God with all that we are. And so to break that leaves us guilty and under judgment. How then can the relationship be restored? How can the covenant be restored? Well, in order for it to be restored, something must be broken and something uniquely precious poured out. Not this time a broken jar and some priceless perfume poured out, nor a broken Passover lamb and its blood wiped on the doorpost. No, it will be Jesus' own body that is broken and his priceless blood that is poured out. His body broken as he dies in our place, taking into himself the punishment that we deserve so that we can go free. And his blood poured out to wash away all our messes, all our guilt, all our failures, all of our sin, cleaning us out so that we're fit to be children of the Most High God. Something broken and something immeasurably precious poured out. Friends, this is love. Sacrificial love. Extravagant love. Love infinitely more extravagant than any love you will ever encounter anywhere else. Jesus dying for us, for me, for you. Here is love that rescues us from guilt and shame and judgment. Here is love which reconciles us to God so that we live now in his embrace and will have a seat at his eternal banqueting table when he arrives. That's what verse 25 is about. Truly, I tell you, I won't drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God. He's looking forward to the moment when Jesus returns and makes the whole of creation new and invites everybody who loves and trusts him to join him around his great banqueting table for the party that will go on forever, where every day will be just as wonderful as the day before, the eternal banquets. And it's his love that draws broken and messed up people like me and you to that banquet and gives us a seat at his table. What crazy love. What extravagant love. What outrageous love. But do you see the connection? The extravagant love of Jesus, who gave himself for the life of the world, the true, the ultimate Passover lamb, and the extravagant love of that woman who saw the real Jesus and who poured perfume on his head. Do you see the connection between the two? What did it take for Jesus to show his extravagant love for the world? It took his body broken on the cross in our place and his priceless blood poured out to make us clean. That was the cost of extravagant love. Something broken and something uniquely precious poured out. What did it cost the woman to express her extravagant love to Jesus? Well, Look again. Look in her hand. See that jar of perfume that she's carrying. But it's when the jar is broken that the priceless perfume can be poured out so that the room is filled with the fragrance of her love. Do you see the link? Something broken so that something precious can be poured out. Friends, the love of Jesus calls for a response of extravagant love from us because he invites us too to receive that love. We call the response of extravagant love worship, adoration, devotion. And that worship is not meant to be cold and distant and formal and dutiful. It's meant to be passionate and extravagant and costly and beautiful, even risky because others may despise us for our devotion to the Master. But something has to be broken for the extravagant love of worship to be poured out. As Jesus' body was broken to pour out his priceless blood for our cleansing. This is the story of my life, to be honest. The experience of losing children was part of God breaking us in order that our lives could be poured out in pastoral ministry. The experience years later of publicly losing a job that I loved was actually what made it possible for the ministry that we've tried to exercise here at Above Bar to be poured out. Something broken, that something else could be poured out. Many of you know me well. I'm in another period of breaking at the moment, and I don't yet quite see exactly what it is that's to be poured out from a newer and perhaps deeper brokenness. But I'm sure God will show me in his time. And for each of us here, if the extravagant love of worship, not just the words we sing and say in church, but the worship of all of our lives, if that extravagant love of worship is to be poured out for the Master, something has to be broken. For some of us, it's our pride that must be broken so that our lives can be poured out for his glory rather than our own. For some of us, our fear of what others think must be broken so that our love and worship can be poured out to Jesus without restraint. For some of us, the hold of our idols on our hearts must be broken so that our love for Jesus can be poured out without dilution, without distraction. Something must be broken for the extravagant love of worship to flow from our lives. What is your response this evening in the face of the most extravagant, costly love in the universe, the love of Jesus? What is your response? Will you reject it and walk away like Judas Iscariot? Or will you respond in the only way that makes sense in the face of such extraordinary love? Respond with the extravagant love of worship, pouring out from a broken and a contrite heart, the risky, costly, beautiful, passionate, extravagant worship of every bit of your life. That's the challenge. Now, what is your response? Tom's going to lead us as we respond to what God is saying. Thank you, Tom.